Okay, hi everybody. Let's go through the answers to portfolio questionnaire number 2. These are all true-false statements. So let's get going. Question 1 is true-false for the statement, the price elasticity of demand for a single plot of land is higher in rural New South Wales than in Sydney. Now, when I wrote this statement, it seemed pretty straightforward. However, as I started to think about what the answer would be, it became progressively more complex. So sorry for that. The reason why it can become progressively more complex is it doesn't really specify what this plot of land is. Are we talking about 5 acres, or are we talking about a block of land on which you would build a standard house? So that's a bit of a problem. And the other is that when you're thinking about Sydney versus rural New South Wales, often you can be talking about very different types of potential buyers. So that's another problem, especially in terms of their incomes perhaps. Anyway, what we can do is, well, what I would do to try and answer this question is I have to make some simplifying assumptions, otherwise it's impossible to say, to give what would be the most plausible answer. Alright, so the way that I would tackle this is to say, alright, let's assume we're dealing with identical plots of land, whether we're talking about Sydney or we're talking about, say, a country town. So a plot of land on which you would build a house, for example, that's pretty standard, normal assumption to make, because it would be a slightly weird assumption to say a piece of agricultural land, because that's not appropriate for Sydney. So anyway, so that's the first thing. Second thing, it might be the case that there are differences, for example, in incomes between people in Sydney and people in country towns. However, I think for our purposes, we can simplify that and say that on average, the average income in a suburb of Sydney is going to be approximately the same to the average income in a country town. Now, that's not entirely realistic, because we know that in cities the average household income is higher than in rural towns. However, it's not massively different. It's not as if people in Sydney, the average income for a household in Sydney is 100,000 and in country towns it's 10,000. It's more like 60,000 average income in Sydney, 60,000, and in a country town, say 50,000. It's not a huge difference. So I'm going to assume they're roughly the same. All right. Now, this question's about price elasticity of demand, so we need to remember what that is. So we're talking about how responsive the quantity demanded is for a product due to a change in price of that product by some percentage. Okay, now we also need to think about what are the key determinants of price elasticity of demand. Those key determinants are 2. One is, ultimately it all boils down to 2 of them. One is the number of substitutes available, and the other is the price of the product relative to the income of the potential buyers. The greater the number of substitutes available, then the more responsive demand is to a change in the price of the product that we're looking at. The fewer the number of substitutes, the less price elastic, the less responsive demand is to a change in price. for price as a proportion of income, the higher the price relative to buyer's income, the more responsive demand is to a change in price. Basically, the more expensive the product is, the more sensitive consumers are to a change in the price of that product. All right, now, with that in mind, let's think about our two scenarios. If, let's say, the price of our identical plots of land in these two places both go up by 10%, how responsive will demand be in each of these places? Well, we know that also, this is part of the problem of the question in a way, that you need to know a little tiny bit about real estate markets in Sydney and in country towns. Not much, but a little bit. We know that in Sydney, when we come to substitutes, we know that in Sydney, if the price of a particular plot of land were to increase by 10%, there are many, 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 many substitutes to choose from. There are many other plots of land that a consumer could potentially purchase instead. In the country town, however, when the price of a particular plot of land goes up in price by 10%, there's not a lot of alternatives to choose from. Right? There might be 2 or 3, 4, maybe 5 other plots of land of the same size on the marketplace, in the market, available for sale. So not many alternatives in the rural town, many, many alternatives in Sydney. So with respect to that determinant, we would say Sydney would have the more price elastic demand for a particular plot of land that increase in price by 10%, which is contrary to what the statement is saying. Let's come to the price as a proportion of income. Now, I said at the beginning that about income for the buyers, potential buyers in these two places. We can simplify by assuming their incomes are roughly the same. They might be a bit different, but they're roughly the same. When we come to the prices of the two goods, however, in the two places, they are radically different. In the city, in Sydney, we know there's a real estate boom. We know that the market price of the average plot of land is crazy. It's very high. Whereas in country towns, the price is quite low by comparison to the city. So then when we think about an increase, the same 10% increase in price in both places, that doesn't translate into the same amount of money, the extra amount of money that would have to be paid in the two places. So just a little quick example. I'll just take you over here. Here we go. And let's see if we can do this. All right. So just very, very quickly, if we've got city, country, and in the city we would say that, let's say, we're just playing with rough numbers, but say in the city it's $500,000 for a plot of land. The same plot of land in a whoop country town is, let's say, $200,000. Okay, now we're interested in the price of the product relative to the buyer's incomes. So price relative to income in both of these cases. And remember, we're interested in how responsive the price is, so we're interested in an increase in the price. We're going to have the same 10% increase in the price. 10% increase in the price, which is the same in both places. So here, the increase in the price for this ratio is going to be 10% of 500,000. That's an extra $50,000 added on top of the price. So this ratio becomes much larger. Whereas here, the increase in the price is, relatively speaking, small. It's only $20,000. Okay? So this ratio gets much larger relative to the increase in this ratio. Okay, so when the price of the product goes up by 10%, but it's a very expensive product, that's a substantial amount of money that would have to be doled out compared to the country town case, in which case the buyers are less interested, maybe less able to afford this new product, which has increased its price substantially because it was already a high price. Okay, so in that case, also for this determinant, we would also say that demand is more responsive to a change in price in the case of the city than in the case of the country town. So with respect to both determinants, we would say that the statement is false. Okay. Next question. Over time, I'm going to walk back over here now. Over time, the price elasticity of supply in a competitive market is likely to increase. And question 3 says the price elasticity of supply is affected by time. So these are really both asking the same thing, so that's a bit of a whoopsies on my part. They should have been quite different. So the answer to one is the answer to the other. So let's answer them together. The answer is simple. With more time, firms can adjust their production plans to better respond to changes in price. So if the price of a good goes up and you have no time to respond to that increase in price, then price elasticity would be very low. The price elasticity of supply would be very low. That is, the quantity supplied would be perhaps entirely unresponsive to a change in price if the firm doesn't have enough time to get more stock onto the shelves due to the higher price that it could charge. If, however, the firm has a bit more time, perhaps it could hire a few more workers in its factory, get them to work overtime or something like that, pump out a few more shoes, say, and then they would be able to supply a larger quantity of shoes to the market due to the higher price. That is, price elasticity of supply would be higher. And if the firm had a lot of time, it could not only add more workers to its factory, its existing factory, it could build whole new factories. And with whole new factories, fill them with workers and produce vast increases in output to sell at this new higher price. That is, demand would be very responsive to a change in price. Supply would be very responsive to a change in price in that case, where the firm had a lot of time, where they were effectively operating, as you now know from your definitions, in the long run. Okay? More time, more price elastic demand. So for each of these statements, the answer is true. 4. Assuming the price elasticity of demand for electricity by households is -2, that's the coefficient, -2. If the electricity supplier increases its prices its revenue will increase. So is that true or false? Remember, when we're talking about the price elasticity of demand coefficient, if it's -2, what does that mean? How can we express that verbally? It means for a 1% increase in the price, there is a 2%, right, decrease. Negative is decrease. 2 is 2%. 2% decrease in the quantity demanded. Okay, so far so good. Now we need to know about, well, what impact would this increase in price have on the revenue of the firm? So remember that revenue, total revenue, is determined by the price of the product times the quantity that is produced and sold. So we're assuming that everything that they're going to supply is going to be sold, because they're choosing that quantity that will be sold. Okay, so we know that we've got price times quantity equals total revenue. And we know that price is increasing by 1% and quantity demanded, and therefore sold, is decreasing by 2%. So this revenue, price times quantity, is being dragged up by 1%, but is being dragged down by 2%. So what happens to that revenue overall? Well, overall, it's going to fall, and it's going to fall by approximately 1%. Yeah? The 1% increase minus the 2% decrease gives you overall approximately a 1% decrease in the total revenue. So, will its revenue increase? No, it will decrease, because the demand is price elastic. It's very responsive to a change in price and will fall substantially compared to the price increase. Okay, so false for that one. Question 5. If the cross price elasticity of demand for two products is -2, then those products are substitutes, not complements. All right, so if we've got the cross price elasticity of demand coefficient is -2, how do we express that in a sentence? We say for a 1%, when you've got the coefficient for some effect, right, we're always going to start our sentence with for a 1% increase in the cause, which in this case is price. For a 1% increase in the price of one type of good, there is a 2% decrease, right? -2, negative meaning decrease, a 2% decrease in the quantity demanded of another type of good. So it means we've got this relationship between two types of goods. The price of one goes up and it causes the quantity demanded of a different good to go down. So what must be the relationship or the nature of these two types of goods? The best way to deal with this is to think about a concrete example. Okay? So, and see what works. Say, for example, you took the concrete case of Mars bars and Snickers. So Mars bars and Snickers are, for most human beings, they're substitutes. They're doing roughly the same thing for the consumer. They're a bit different, but they're performing the same function. So, providing deliciousness in the human being's mouth. All right. So, if the price of Mars bars were to increase, what would happen to the quantity demanded of Snickers? Price of Mars bars goes up, people decrease the quantity demanded of Mars bars, and as a result, they switch over to the substitute deliciousness, Snickers, increase in the quantity demanded of Snickers. Price of Mars bars goes up, quantity demanded of Snickers goes up. Right? These two, the price and the quantity demanded of these two goods move together, both up or both down. But this question's not about that. This question is saying when the price of one good goes up, the quantity demanded of a different good goes down. So we need to think of another concrete example. So in that case, we might say When the price of cars goes up, people buy fewer cars perhaps, and as a result, the quantity demanded of the things you buy with cars, such as petrol and tyres, goes down. Yeah? That's what we're seeing in this question. So those two types of good, cars and petrol, cars and tyres, cars and mechanical tune-ups, these are complementary goods. And that's what this statement is talking about. It's talking about complementary goods. So when we have a negative coefficient. All right, so the statement, these products are substitutes, not complements. No, that's false. They are complements. Question 6. In Australia, income elasticity of demand is likely to be higher for cars compared to bicycles. Remember what income elasticity of demand is? It means that when buyers' incomes rise, the quantity demanded of the products that they might be interested in changes. Now, we've got two basic kinds of relationships we can think of. That is, when buyers' incomes rise, they buy more of the product. If that's the case, then the product is classified as a normal good. If, on the other hand, when buyers' incomes rise and people buy less of the product, then it's an inferior good. When your income rises, you buy less home brand toilet tissue paper. Because home brand toilet tissue paper is an inferior product. I assume you think that. You should. Anyway. So let's think about the cars and the bicycle case. For cars, when people's incomes rise, do they buy more cars? I think as a general rule, we can say yes. So a household with an average income will have maybe one car. Their income goes up, they'll get two. As their income goes up further, they might get three. If there's three people in the house, one for their darling child. What if they become fabulously wealthy? Do they still buy more cars? Well, we know that actually they do. They don't necessarily just buy more cars and pile them up like, some kind of lunatic like, Jerry Seinfeld or something like that. We just keep buying more and more cars with like some kind of, weird bone collector. Rather, in reality, most of them will just buy more cars more frequently. So they'll buy a car, they'll keep it for a year, then they'll trade it in and buy another one. And then another year they'll buy another one. They buy more cars in that sense, often. But is that the case for bicycles as well? Well, it seems not. That when people's incomes rise, they don't buy more and more and more bicycles, either in terms of just sheer quantity of bicycles, as some people do with cars, nor in terms of turnover. People whose incomes rise, they don't immediately think, well, maybe I'll get another bicycle. I might get another car, but not another bicycle. And maybe another yacht, but not another bicycle. Okay? So, thinking about the question now. Income elasticity of demand is likely to be higher for cars compared to bicycles. Well, that's true. Incomes rise. The quantity demanded of cars is likely to rise faster than the quantity demanded of bicycles. The statement's true. Question 7. If the price of oysters falls by 10% and the quantity demanded increases by 10%, then the demand for oysters is price elastic. So percentage change in the quantity demanded over the percentage change in the price gives us our price elasticity of demand. And in our example here, we've got 10% change in the quantity demanded over 10% change in the price. 10 over 10 is 1. So we know that by definition this is called unit price elastic. Why is it called unit price elastic? Because the coefficient is 1. In absolute terms, really there should be a negative sign there, okay, indicating that when the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. Right? So we've got a negative sign and a positive sign, gives you an overall negative sign. Anyway, the coefficient in absolute terms is 1. So another word for 1 is unit, so we call it unit price elastic demand. Now, that means, what is this price elastic demand? Well, technically it is price elastic demand, because unit price elastic is still classified as elastic by most economists, right? It's just a specific kind of elastic demand, right? We want to specify it. So you would say perhaps that this is true. However, I know that some of you might want to say, well, I want to distinguish between just everyday run-of-the-mill price elastic demand and unit price elastic demand. So I want to say that this statement is false. Now, I am a merciful person at this point in the unit, because we haven't got to the final exam yet. So I'm going to say, if you said true or false, I'm going to give it to you. Okay? If you didn't answer the question, obviously you're not going to get anything for that. Or if you did answer, but not with the words true or false, but, just a random word, then no, I'm not going to give you marks for that. Question 8. BMW's advertising slogan, "The ultimate driving machine," is designed to increase the price elasticity of demand for its cars. Right, so we're saying that this advertising slogan is going to affect consumers' perceptions in such a way that when they put the price up, the quantity demanded will fall by more than before. Or, alternatively, when they put their price down, the quantity demanded will rise by more than it previously did. Right? That this demand will be made more responsive to a change in the price of its cars. Is that the purpose of the advertising? Well, go back to think about the determinants of price elasticity of demand again. Remember, the first determinant that we thought of was the number of substitutes available. Does this kind of advertising try and persuade consumers that there are more substitutes available than before? That this product, the BMWs, are close substitutes for alternatives that are available in the marketplace, and thereby rendering price elasticity of demand higher? Or is this advertising trying to convince the consumers that there are really no substitutes for the BMW car? I think it's the latter. Obviously, the ultimate driving machine suggests this is somehow unique. Right? You can't have more than one ultimate driving machine. There's only the ultimate driving machine and less than ultimate. That's the nature of the term ultimate. They're trying to convince the consumers there are no substitutes for a BMW. So, if they were to put the price up, consumers of BMWs might say to themselves, well, I don't really have any alternatives available. I'm going to have to buy another BMW. That is, demand won't be very responsive to a change in price if this advertising is successful. So that statement is false. The purpose of the advertising campaign is to decrease price elasticity of demand for its cars. And question 9. On a rainy day, the absolute price elasticity of demand coefficient for umbrellas increases. So remember again the determinants of price elasticity of demand. Okay? So when we come to a rainy day, are there many substitutes available for umbrellas? Are there lots of alternatives to umbrellas to get from one place to another? Really? No. Umbrellas are pretty much the staple means by which you will keep yourself dry in moving from one place to another. So, with suddenly there's a rainy day, few substitutes or virtually no substitutes available, no alternatives available. So, if the price were to go up, the quantity demanded wouldn't substantially fall because there's no alternatives. Okay? So we would say that the price elasticity of demand for umbrellas would not increase. If anything, it would decrease, because in that situation, you can't find alternatives. If it were a sunny day, you can swan around looking for alternatives to umbrellas to your heart's content. Okay? Right? Wandering around in the sunshine looking for various alternatives to umbrellas. But when it's raining, you don't have time to muck around with that. You have to just buy the umbrella that's there at the kiosk, usually at the train station, where they're charging exorbitant prices for their umbrellas. And they know they're charging those exorbitant prices because they know you're going to buy them, right? Because there's no alternatives. All right. And number 10, the price elasticity of demand coefficient for unit elastic demand is equal to 1. Well, this is just a slam dunk no-brainer because it's true by definition. You can just look that up. It's just the definition of it. Right? Unit elastic demand is defined as a coefficient, price elasticity of demand coefficient equal to 1. That is, for a 1% increase in price, there's a 1% decrease in the quantity demanded. Or for a 5% increase in price, there's a 5% decrease in the quantity demanded. 5 over 5 is 1. And okay. So that's that. I hope you did well with this portfolio questionnaire for this week. And I hope you do better or as well for the next one. Bye-de-bye.